You are watching Co-op for Two, broadcasting live from Champaign, Illinois, April 16th, 2023, Sunday afternoon around 3 p.m. You may hear my voice is a little hoarse. Today we are playing turn 16 of The Case of the Blinded Birder, a game by MurdersByMail.com. We're squeezing the blood out of the stone of this game at this point. We've basically wrapped up the case. We're just chasing down some loose ends and exploring this town because this is our last game, last of the 3 games from this company, the last of the play-by-mail games that we know about to play. So we're trying to get as much out of it as we can. Let's just catch up a little bit. The reason my voice sounds a little hoarse is I've been up for 15 hours or so working on a very frustrating bug in a program I'm writing. I'm working on another OBS plugin, and I feel like I've suffered a little nervous breakdown in the last 15 hours trying to get this thing solved. So ideally, I would have gone to sleep before today's stream, but we're just going to have to make do. Let's catch up with the chat. And Tina was just going through some of the highlights of the last 3 streams. How was your cinema experience with 3 movies? Okay, so I saw a triple feature with my friends here. And my sleep schedule rotates. Ideally, I'm up at night, but that causes a little bit of trouble. So we went and saw 3 movies. We saw Dungeons and Dragons, whatever the subtitle is. We saw John Wick 4, which is like a 3-hour movie. And then we saw Renfield. When I go to the movies, I bring earplugs, and if I need to, I take little naps. And I slept through the last 2 movies, big chunks of them. Here's a little mini spoiler review. I thought Dungeons and Dragons was really well done. Lots of care went into that. You could tell like they probably were working on that script for a couple years. It was polished and nice and funny and very well done. John Wick 4, I'm not a fan of the series in general, and I hated it. It feels to me like that is an insult to movie making. Had just like done with people who have no soul. Like I was angry from watching John Wick 4. Not that I like the movies in general, but it feels like they're really bad now. They are just don't care. They don't care. And then Renfield was not bad at all. The woman who's in Renfield, Awkwafina, is a really natural comedian, so it's enjoyable to just watch her. But it was a comedy, but fine. Okay, so behind me you see a couple of new things. You see the Photo Crimes book. There's some interesting, in the history of these old games, Photo Crimes book are an area that we haven't looked at yet. And we'll take a look at some of them at some point. They're basically lots of photos and you're trying to figure out crime. So each of those books, there's at least 3 of them in this series. There may be more. They're fairly old. And you try to solve the crime by trying to spot things in photos. And then next to that is a book called Not Innocent, a very strange book that Jonathan Warner found. And then next to that mug book, which I'll be doing an unboxing of soon. And then Greg and I have been playing a lot of Subterra. And Tina says there's a new Cartaventura game out. If you'll remember, Cartaventura is probably, can you see it up there on the top shelf? You kind of can. You'd have to have an eagle eye to spot it. It's above Friday over here. Right there is the old Cartaventura Vasa. We played that on the channel, the Vasa, and I quite liked it, so maybe we'll play another one. Okay, last little thing before we jump in today's session. I've been looking to find a game to pick up after this one ends, and it's not quite going to do it, but the closest I came is a play-by-mail game system called Dear Holmes, and I have 2 of the first letters from Dear Holmes right in front of me. And what I've done is I've scheduled the first session of this for today at 4:30. So I won't say anything more about it, but if you join me today at 4:30, so we'll finish this one, we'll take a little break, and then I'll start a new session. We'll open up and read those envelopes. You can go online and read about what Dear Holmes is, or you could wait for 4:30 and I'll talk about it. All right. So let's get started here. Obviously, you remember the drill. If you haven't watched the previous sessions, you shouldn't be watching this. And here is the next reply that came yesterday. So they've been coming just in time. And we are really almost done with this. It's a matter of deciding when we want to stop looking around. But there are actually a couple of things I wouldn't mind doing. I'm not in any rush to finish it. So, let's recap where we sent people. All right, so looking at the envelope here, where did we send everyone? Well, we've got the RAF up here that we haven't been to. We haven't had a reason to go to, really, this entire case. The newspaper had an article about it that maybe was meant to tempt you. We never found any compelling real reason to go here. But we decided at the end of last turn, what the hell, let's head up to the RAF base, check it out. So we sent 2 people to the RAF base. We sent Imogen up to the barracks to sort of flirt with the men there to see if she could get information. And we sent the vicar to the admin office. We suspect they're just going to be like, we don't know your guy, what are you doing here? But on the other hand, they are quite near the scene of the crime, so maybe one of them might be a witness. And then Cecily, we sent for the hell of it to Juliet Porter's house. And if you'll remember, Juliet Porter was someone from Rupert Albright's past, a customer at the carpet shop who we think he blackmailed. We don't think it's relevant to solving our murder, but we're sort of curious if we might be able to solve a little side murder, like maybe she killed someone. All right, so let's see what we got. So here's Cecily going to Juliet Porter, and she's got a long letter here, so it looks like there was actually something for her to see. Let's see what she says. Dearest Jessie, B61 is a stately cottage overlooking the Gorge of Trestle Cross. A hand-carved sign at the drive reads, The Sierras. A striking woman of about 30 met me at the door. Hello, I said. I'm looking for a Miss Porter. Mrs. Porter. I'm Juliet Porter. I glanced back at the sign in the drive. She followed my eyes and explained, Well, Sierra is my maiden name. My husband's name was Porter. I live here now with my mother. I introduced myself, told her about Albright and what we've learned at the carpet store. After hearing me out, she got a thoughtful look, stepped free of the front door, and made her way toward the rear lawn and its view of the river. I followed. When I was 19, I fell in love with a Scotsman named Angus, a seasonal laborer on the railroad. When he left me, I met Paul, my husband-to-be. Paul was about to ship out for the front, so we married in wild haste. Only after he was gone did I realize the mistake I'd made. She gazed back at the rusty bridge that spanned the water. I didn't love Paul, but what could I do? I wrote him lovingly. Every letter made me feel more trapped and more lonely. Months went by. Then the new year came, and Angus appeared on my doorstep with a bottle of Merlot in hand. She gave me a challenging look. It would be easy for me to tell you it was all his idea, but it was not. I took Angus into our little house, our little bed. This time I understood he wasn't in love with me, but I didn't care. We tipped the bottle of wine and it stained the bedroom carpet. I see, I said. So you needed Albright to replace it and he blackmailed you? Yes. Paul was about to return on leave. Albright came to survey the job. He made a nasty joke about wine spills and husbandless bedrooms, then laughed in my face when he saw he'd guessed it right. He told me it'd be a shame if he had to tell my husband what I'd done. He said, "Don't feel bad, dearie. You'd be amazed at what people will pay to keep their secrets." He pointed at me and pointed at one eye and said, "We birders see all kinds of interesting things." So I paid him. In the end, it didn't matter. Paul's entire unit was lost at Anzio. She sighed. Well, when I read Albright was dead, I felt relieved. He was a terrible human being, a blackmailer and a manipulator. But I didn't kill him. I believe you, but the police might need an alibi. I had a meeting at the Open Door Council. Police can ask anyone there. All right, so we were right about Juliet Porter's backstory. She did have an affair. She was blackmailed. Sorry, we didn't guess that she had an affair. We guessed that Albright blackmailed her. But we thought maybe she killed someone and stained the carpet, and that's how he blackmailed her. Turns out instead, she just had an affair, spilled some wine, and was trying to cover that up. So we have no criminal prosecution of Juliet. She seems believable. That wraps up that loose end. All right. Here comes the RAF base. Imogen is going straight to the enlisted men at the barracks. Let's see what Imogen finds. Dearest Jessie, leaving Worcester at home, I took the short drive to the Creighton Air Base barracks. Eventually, I was led to a young airman named Peter Cole. "Oh, everybody's heard about Albright," he said, "and that silly article in the paper about our airplane radios. Personally, I think the Albright story is a better place to spend your time. I agree, it smells like murder." "Well, Albright is the main point of my inquiry. Can you tell me anything interesting?" "Yeah, I was on South Sentry the night he died. Heard a gunshot right after dark, I did, coming from the old Borley Wood. I was doing me guard path along the fence line when it happened. Wood's just on the far side of the road, so I heard it plain and clear." "Oh my," I said. "Do you often hear gunfire? I mean, off the base?" Cole frowned. "Aye, sometimes, but usually it's at dusk where there's still some light. Poachers got to see, same as everyone else. This shot came after it was dark. More I think about it, Mum, more I think it had to be the shot what killed Albright." I was suddenly at full attention. "Go on, Peter." "Well, when it happened, I followed the sound out through the fence gate there by the road. I took out my torch and scanned the trees across the tarmac. Didn't see anything but trunks and bramble, but then, a bit eastward, I heard some tromping and a person came out of the undergrowth and dashed for an empty car that was parked there. He got in fast and drove off before I could get a decent look, but I'm pretty sure they was alone." pretty sure they weren't carrying anything big like a rifle, and I'm pretty sure it was a woman. But, how could you tell if it was so dark? I asked. Aye, it was dark, and I was far off enough that my torch only showed a bit of chrome reflecting off the car. I couldn't even tell you its color, much less its plate, but when the headlamps came on, the driver, same person who came from the woods, was in silhouette for just a glance. Something in the shape of their neck and hair up, or maybe bobbed short, but still not a man's haircut. He ran his fingers over his own close crop to make his point. Car dashed off east, that's all I saw. Have you told this to the police? I asked. Aye, Inspector came round asking the next morning, and I was the only person on base who had something to say. If it's the murderer you're after, I'd say you're wasting your time with anything having to do with the RAF. Okay. So, everything confirmed about what we already knew. Nice to have a little more confirmation that this is a lone shooter in her car. We had another witness tell us very similar scene, but this guy is very sure that it's one woman by herself and she left. And he even tells us a little bit about her hairstyle. Hair up or maybe bobbed short. I suppose that could be any woman, even though we're almost certain that it's Kathleen Carwood. So there you have it. More confirmation about our killer. Now, Nicola points out it's a little odd that the inspector, that this guy says he told the inspector, and the inspector still suspiciously was insisting it was a poacher. Like, is there any connection between, is there any reason that our inspector seems to really not want to catch this woman? We haven't found any connection between him and her. It may just be his prejudice that he doesn't think a woman could shoot. It could be a murderer. Have you told the police? Inspector came around. All right. We did go to the inspector's house. We talked to his wife. She just told us he's embarrassed to admit, but he did realize it's not the poacher. So that does suggest that the inspector's not purposely trying to cover it up. All right, let's see what the vicar is writing. He's titled this report, Taking a Flyer on the Flyers. He talked to the admin office. Captain Charles Bilston of our Royal Air Force is a tall man with a symmetrical face and the kind of build that military uniforms were designed to enhance. What's more, he's a nice chap, and he agreed to speak with me at my earliest convenience. This morning, in fact. I got a lift from a parishioner to the base's front gate, and as promised, Captain Bilston met me there. Thanks for calling ahead, Vicar, he said. Smooths the bureaucratic process with a bit of forewarning. I smiled and told him what we were up to as he escorted me toward the admin office. Murder, he said. Of course, I heard about the shooting. Wasn't far from Cryerton when it happened. Of course, the good inspector came round asking if any of the guards happened to see something. Inspector Swift, you mean? Yeah, of course. And did they? Oh. The guards, did they see anything? Well, sort of. Our guard shift changes just after dark. Apparently, a single shot was heard at the time. Seems possible it could have been the one that killed that birder chap. Anyway, the guard who heard it made his way to the south fence of the base. Says he saw a car parked across the road under the trees, but it was too dark to see what kind exactly. Car accelerated fast and drove off east towards Bockery. You think it was the murderer? I asked. Well, perhaps. But if it was, we didn't have any useful details for poor Swift. Oh, except one thing. Guard thought the driver was a woman. Interesting. We'd arrived at the office. He took me inside and we continued our conversation. Well, given your interest in mysteries, I'm surprised you haven't asked me about the radio interference, said Captain Bilston. After that story in the paper about Sable Drug and their radio program being ruined, reporters started calling, asking into all the secret radio research we're doing around here. There's only one problem, though. Oh, yeah? What's that? I asked. He smiled. Well, we don't do any radio research here, so I'm not sure what George Sable is drinking, but I can tell you I'd like a glass of it myself. All right. So if you're interested in the side story about the radio interference, he's denying it. Not sure what we make of that. But those are our 3 visits. Nothing new there, except no interference, he claims. Let's take a look at this newspaper for a second. A number of residents had their favorite BBC music broadcast interrupted by radio interference. 8:13 to 8:28, according to witnesses. Music was overpowered by a high-pitched noise. George Sable Drugstore was one affected. Same time, Sable heard a slow-moving airplane flying circles over the Air Force field. I've heard rumors they're trying out classified radar. Well, what do you make of that? If this is a little side mystery, do we believe the guy at the Air Force Base that they don't do such, that they're not investigating radar? Do we think it was something else? Do we think it's not important? We always played the program at the store where the only source music was ruined. He heard a slow-moving airplane. So, on our list of possible places we could go, we could talk to Sable. Could talk to George Sable if we want to try to get to the bottom of it. Okay, so let's talk about, if we want to keep going, draw this out, where we want to go. We could talk to George Sable, get firsthand information about the radio broadcast. We could talk to the poachers, including the one new poacher that we heard about. We could talk to one of our informants that we haven't been to. There's a bunch of informants we haven't yet been to. Let's just take a look. We haven't been to Graham, the reporter at the newspaper. We haven't been to the Historical Society, and we haven't been to the Library Stacks. No good reason that we have to go to the Library Stacks or the Historical Society. But the newspaper reporter, good for gossip, seems like that could be useful. In terms of little mini mysteries still left, the biggest one, the biggest real mystery here has to do with Wendt. Where we discovered the game bug, why we have not run into someone telling us that Wendt's body was found. And then, let's see, there's the Jolly Run moving company. There's the family of Albright's wife. We've sort of wrapped up that thing, but if we wanted to for fun, we could go there. There are a couple places that might have more witnesses. That seems unlikely to be useful to us. We could just randomly go to a couple places on the map if something strikes our fancy. Let's see what the channel wants to do. Nicholas says, maybe we should look at the questions and decide whether we want to go on or not. Rob says, investigate the police. Debbie says, yes, it's a good idea to look at the questions. So I feel like we're going to be able to answer the questions. I'm not against reading the questions, but I do think that we should hang around. We should not end it yet, but I'm open to reading the questions. So let's do that. Let's open up. I feel like we've got it solved. Let's take a look at the questions. And then I think maybe we can informally answer them, but then I think we shouldn't solve it. Because remember, once we solve it, it's over and you can't go anywhere else. Okay, let's take a look. Here we go. Your answers to these questions will determine if you have untangled the plot and unmasked the killer. These primary questions deal with the most important aspects of the case: murderer, motive, method, etc. Who killed Rupert Albright? What was the killer's motive? What location should the police visit to catch the killer? The secondary questions involve side plots and details you may or may not have uncovered. They are not required to solve the case, but correct answers provide extra points. What was Juliet keeping from her husband? This is fascinating. I just want to point out, we know the answer to that she spilled the wine on the carpet and was having an affair. But let me just point out that the only reason we've uncovered this side case was because Robert insisted on visiting his old work at the carpet store. So that was a lead that many of us thought was not worth following, and it turned out that it's one of the secondary questions. Okay, what was the source of the ghost stories? We believe we know the answer to that. That was Kathleen Carwood planting evidence in the dig. What new hobby had Rupert Albright taken up recently? We know that. It's listening to the bats. How did Alice Albright die? I think we know that too. We've talked to her doctor and she got tuberculosis and died. She died in hospital of tuberculosis. Husband wasn't even there. So I believe we know the answer to these side cases. I will point out, though, that these are side cases that we only recently figured out all of. So it's kind of actually rewarding that we went on all our side case hunting, because these first and last, question 4 and 7, we actually only recently figured out the answers to. Now, who killed Rupert Albright? We know that's Kathleen Carwood. The motive was to get out of blackmail, but now, do we know the answer to 3? I mean, we went and visited her house, but was she at her house? I don't think she was. That's a tricky question. Let me see what the chat says. Is the killer now in hiding? Her house was empty. Do we need to track her car down? Debbie says, we met Kathleen at the dig. Presumably that's the answer. Rob says, the mummy birds and the missing dog weren't asked about. Debbie says she's at the dig, or did she go into hiding after the second murder? That is a tricky question. She's not at her house. We broke into her house and found the gun. But she was at the dig where we initially found her. But how would we know? That's tricky. Jan says she might be on the run. We know her friend Janet Rosso was her best friend and wanted to protect her. But we visited Janet's house and we didn't see her there. That's tricky. That is tricky. Trying to remember if we knew about her car. Do we have a description of her car from anyone? And if so, I'd hate to get caught in a mistake. Like when we visited Janet Rosso's house, they didn't describe like a car being parked outside it, do we? Janet Rosso. Here's the letter from Janet Rosso. She's got a photo of Kathleen there. She says, we've been best friends since school. Rosso, now fuming, dropped her unfinished sandwich into the bin. I have to go. I'm expected back at the dig. That sounds like that's where Kathleen is going to hang out, at the dig. But I guess she's not on the run. She doesn't know that anyone's onto her. Although she kind of does, because she knows we've tracked down Went, and now Went's body has been found. But where's she going to go? She's got nowhere to hide. Let's see. Debbie says, I'm pretty sure we're overthinking things and she's still at the dig. No evidence clues change over time, so if we hadn't visited her yet and went to the dig, she'd probably still be there. That's a good point. Rob says, would Kathleen have any reason to run? Otherwise, she would be found at home or work. Question makes it sound as if we need to track her down. And Tina said, are we 100% sure it's her, not the other woman? Yeah, we are. Yeah. Emmy says, but the murder weapon is at the house. Police need to go there to make the case. The question is, what location should the police visit to catch the killer? That sounds like it's going to be the dig to me. But here's what I suggest. I suggest we not answer these questions yet, because I think we should still look around a little bit more. And what's the rush? If you're playing at home, you can, and you were curious, you got tired of joining us for these silly chasing down of leads. Now you know the questions, you can answer them yourself. You don't have to join us for additional turns. But I think we should make another additional turn. So where would people like to go? Some choices are the poachers. We got the names of 2 poachers who we know didn't do it, but could be witnesses. We've got the Jolly Run Freight Yard if we're interested in tracking down the birds, even though we're not asked about it. How did Alice Albright die? We could chase that down a little bit by going to the hospital she died at or talking to her family, her brother. Probably they suspect Rupert, even though we don't, because we talked to her doctor. And we could talk to George Sable about the airwaves, but we know that's not a question. Nicholas said Constable Harlan or the police station. All right, now who is Constable Harlan? Where is he mentioned, Nicola? Police station E3. I don't feel like there's a need for us to go to the police station. But I wouldn't mind going to the newspaper informant who knows about gossip. And maybe the library stacks is where we could find the third person that Kathleen Carwood worked with at the research. Historical Society, library. We could send 3. We've got 3 more informant places to go to. The Historical Society, the library stacks, and the newspaper. So we could just hit those 3 places. Or we could go to one of the other poachers. George Sable with the noise. I think we should go to these 3 places. I don't think, now that we know there's no question about Sable or the birds, it seems to me like those are loose ends we don't need to follow. But these 3 are bound to be somewhat interesting. So I'm going to suggest we go to these 3. So let's do that. Any other, but you could convince me otherwise. If someone else has someplace else they want to make the case to go, now's your time. If anyone has the one question we're not 100% sure of, well, first of all, we only have the doctor's word for how the wife died, and there's a question about how she died. So we could go to the hospital to get real solid confirmation before we answer that. The hospital should be able to really confirm to us that she died of tuberculosis. What do you think? Okay, here's my suggestion. We send Cecily to her old friend at the newspaper. That's B65. We send the vicar to the hospital to really lock down how she died. That was Middlesex Hospital. I believe Middlesex Hospital. Where was the hospital? Middleshire, B50. Let's send the vicar there, maybe. Hospital. And where do you want to send Imogen? Either to the Historical Society or the library stacks. Or Poacher. Definitely no more RAF. I think we're done with the RAF. Any idea, like if we weren't sure where Kathleen Carwood would be hiding, run off to, or we weren't sure about Went. Oh, that's why you wanted to go to Constable Harlan. Was Constable Harlan the person mentioned when they found the body of Went? Where was the... We found another body. Let's see. Inspector Swift. Inspector shouted one of the policemen, waving from the muddy hole that no doubt housed the corpse. You should see this. I'd love to get more information about the body, but... Clemens Folly is that's the place where the body was found. Good place to hide a body. Set up ropes around a muddy spot. So let me just point out, that's where the body was buried. We could do the same thing we did before and go to the neighbor to see if they saw the woman or who dropped off the body. But now that we've looked at the questions, it's clear we don't need to know that. Let's see, what does the chat want to do? The police station is where I thought we might hear about Went. I want to go to Constable Harlan to see why the police is so reluctant to catch the killer. Why does Harlan is mentioned in a newspaper article, is that right? Constable Harlan and I concluded a thorough investigation. So that's a good point. And you're saying we didn't visit him? Constable Harlan is L19. All right, let's send Imogen to L19 if we can. The person who was mentioned early on. All right, let's go to, we're going one to an informant, one to the hospital, and one to Constable Harlan. Maybe he's heard about Went and the dead body. Let's just go to those rather than overthinking it too much. 65. She's going to her news person. L19, that's Constable Harlan, who found the body originally. I'm assuming, I guess we haven't been there. It seems so odd that we didn't go to one of the guys that found it. Okay, so if anyone is going to tell us that the inspector is in on it, this guy will. And then the vicar is going to the hospital to follow up and make sure that Mrs. Albright died of tuberculosis. And maybe we keep going on this game. All right, I'm going to send the moves. Let's see what happens. All right, that's it. It took them. All right, I know this may be frustrating for some of you who think, well, we know enough to answer this, but at least we've looked at the questions now. I think it is something to chew on, though, how we answer that question about where to go to catch the killer. That is an awkward question for us. Just going to mark our last entry here, B65. I'd like to hear everyone's vote about where, there's our B65. What does everyone think would be the right answer for where to go to catch the killer? If she's run off, she could literally be anywhere. I really think we're barking up the wrong tree here. I do agree with you. I do think that it's just the dig. I'm not disagreeing. I'm not disagreeing with you. And I agree that we don't have any other evidence of where she would go. I will just point out one little Emmy says, to me, the question suggests it's not where you might expect. Most people seem to agree she's at the dig. The only thing I will point out in terms of how you could imagine the game would try to be clever. Remember, events do happen in this game. Went was killed. It's troublesome that we haven't found how the game intended for us to find that. You could imagine, we've now heard about Kathleen Carwood driving in her car. You could imagine that we missed some scene where her car was described very casually outside her friend's house. Or you could imagine that she's with her other friend, but the fact that they were best friends with Janet Russo for so long makes me think if anyone would be protecting her, it would be Janet. And Janet doesn't seem to be protecting her. She seems to be going to the dig, which I think suggests that Kathleen Carwood is at the dig and not on the run. But let me ask you this. Isn't that a weird question then? Like, why not say, like, let me ask you something. Why question 1 and 3? Like, why ask question 3? If you figure out that it's Kathleen Carwood, obviously you've met her at the dig. Why ask a separate question about what location should the police visit to catch the killer? That's just very weird to ask both of those questions. It kind of sounds like we're supposed to figure out how to catch her. Looks like the chat is chewing on this question too. You could figure out she's the culprit without actually meeting her. I guess you could. It's weird that it hasn't asked us who killed Went, etc. All right, well, anyway, something for you to chew on between now and next week. We'll decide whether we want to solve it next week or keep going. There's still another couple of weeks worth of places we could go. You think on it, chew on it. Let me know next week. For those of you joining me for opening the Dear Holmes letters, I'll see you in about half an hour. For the rest of you, I'll see you next week. Thank you for joining me. Goodbye.